I wanted to talk today about some things in the silver market that may be a little bit more useful to those who are trying to look at silver as more of a long-term savings instrument than a short-term get-rich-quick type of a vehicle. And so we're going to talk about that in just a moment. I did want to bring you up to date on the market today. Today is Tuesday, February the 10th of 2026. And we're at about 2 hours before the closing of the market for the day. And it's been a fairly tame day, especially over the last month and the last week. It's been an extremely tame day. Yesterday was a much slower day than we've experienced in a long time. If you'll recall, yesterday we were talking about the low volume with a few hours left in the market. Well, the total volume on the COMEX was about 106,000 contracts, which was about 530 million ounces of silver that traded on the COMEX futures market. That sounds like a lot, especially when you consider that the annual world's output for mining for silver is just 830 million ounces. But in fact, that 530 million ounces that were traded on the COMEX yesterday represented the lowest total for well over a month. And so not only did the range slow down, did we have a much smaller range between our high and our low, but a much lower volume. And today seems to be a repeat of that. Today's volume may actually come in under 100,000 contracts. And if it does that, that's going to be less than 500 million ounces of silver traded on the futures market for the first time in quite some time. And so these 2 days really are starting to indicate a little bit of the market catching its breath. Sometimes when you see the market narrow like this, though, and especially if it stays in a narrow range, it's almost like a spring that's coiling up, and the energy is at some point going to have to go in one direction or another. So that may be something to keep in mind. This could be the calm before the storm. But this is where we're at right now, a very calm, somewhat normal day if you wanted to look at the history of the silver market as compared to what we have had in the last 30 days or so, and certainly in the last week or so. I also wanted to mention a couple items that are in the news that we've been talking about, but I want to maybe encourage you not to get too caught up in the hype on some of these news stories. One is this: the March contract is coming up. There's still about, I think, 376,000 contracts that are open. There is 73,000 contracts that are open, or about 366 million ounces of silver that are committed to being sold if those who have bought the other end of that contract decide that they want to take delivery in March. Right now, the COMEX has about 100 million ounces in their registered category, silver that's available to be sold. And if any portion over that in March demands delivery, then it could cause something of a problem. We have started to see an unwinding, though, of the open interest. Again, we've got 73,000 contracts open for the March delivery. Just a few days ago, we had much closer to 85,000 contracts. And so we have come down significantly on that. We still have about 365 million ounces of silver that are spoken for should people decide to take delivery, and that could cause a problem. And so there's been a lot of looking towards that particular day. I certainly am looking at that day with quite a bit of interest, but I don't want you to take that to mean that I know that something is going to happen, that the COMEX is going to break on that particular day, and that we're just going to have absolute chaos in the market. I suspect that we have less than a 50% chance, maybe less than a 25% chance of something really significant happening on that day, but that's still a pretty high percentage of something wild happening. And so I do think it's something we need to keep on our radar screen. I think we need to be very aware of what could happen in that contract. And February the 27th, as we've mentioned before, is the first intent to take delivery day. So keep your eye on that. Keep your eye on the open interest, which as of today is 73,000 contracts, and watch to see if that starts to decline significantly before that first day of intent to take delivery. And also keep very much attention placed upon that 27th of February when it occurs, and see if there's a lot of people who do intend to take delivery and announce their intent on that day. Again, I don't want to overhype that. Is it something that could really create significant problems? It certainly is, but I still think that it's far less than a 50% chance of that happening. So don't get too caught up in the hype, I guess, is my suggestion on that. The other thing is with the market in Shanghai closing this Friday at noon and being closed for an entire week after that, not opening up until I believe the 23rd of February, that could cause some problems as far as the liquidity that we have in the market right now. Shanghai is the major physical delivery market when it comes to silver and gold in the world right now, and just them being closed for a week could cause some different anomalies within the market. And so again, would I keep my eye on that? And I absolutely would. Things could happen as a result of that, and banks tend to take advantage of situations like that. But I also want to point out something else. Very often when everybody expects the market to go one direction, that's when the really big players will give a big push in the opposite direction. And when the market starts going opposite of what common knowledge believed it was going to do, well, very often you'll have the herd that was going in one direction plunge in the other direction. And so there could be some shenanigans going on in the next week or two, if that's a word that people even understand anymore. And so I do think that we need to be very attentive of these big things that are going on, but I wouldn't get too caught up in the hype. I certainly, if I was not planning on buying any silver in the next few weeks or selling any silver in the next few weeks, I would not change my plans unless you saw something in your own personal circumstances that made you feel compelled to do so. If you are planning on just buying on a dollar cost averaging cycle anyway, and this is part of that cycle, by all means do that. If you have certain sell points in the market and it hits your sell points, by all means don't abandon your plan. I'm just saying don't change your plans based upon what people are saying, trying to hype the market up in one direction or another, because the fact is nobody really knows. And usually by the time you get to an event, all the news has already been baked into the cake. And so very often the market will go in the opposite direction that most people think it's going to. So just keep that in mind as far as that goes. Now, as far as something that hopefully you will find useful for the long term, I wanted to talk to you about why we invest in silver in the first place. And it has a lot to do with not only our inflation rate, but also with our national debt and the state of not only the US dollar, but fiat currencies around the world. Certainly the fiat currencies are starting to weaken. Central banks all over the world have been massively stocking up on gold in the last 2 years, and they've even started stocking up on silver as well. Nations have been doing the same thing, and big corporations, family companies that have substantial holdings have been doing the same. And so the big boys have been jumping into silver and gold in the last couple of years. And I believe it's for those reasons. I believe they see the fiat currencies starting to be a little bit shaky. I think they see the US dollar being the world's reserve currency starting to come into question, especially with the BRICS alliances that are being formed right now, and then just the general world uncertainty with wars and rumors of wars and everything that goes along with that. It's not a bad idea to just be prepping in general. I've mentioned before, I would definitely have some sort of a strategic pantry in mind. And when I talk about that, I mean just go through your house and look at the things that you would typically use, maybe even in the next year. Especially spend time in your kitchen, in your bathroom, in your garage, and look at the things that you use on a fairly regular basis. And that will tell you, I believe, the types of items that you need to be considering for a longer term strategic pantry, and it will not hurt you to stock up on those items. And I want to talk about that just for a moment. It has a lot to do with inflation, as well as some of the other difficulties that we see going on in the world right now. But it also has to do with the uncertainty of any individual's own personal circumstances. People do get sick, people lose their jobs, things happen in people's lives and in their families where things just change, and they change in a hurry. If you have a certain amount of things in store, whether we're talking about physical goods in your pantry, whether you're talking about having a little bit of money set aside, or whether we're talking about having real money in the form of silver or gold set aside, these things will insulate you from different things that could happen. They're not going to make everything better, but they'll make your personal circumstances better by doing so. But inflation has a lot to do with that. Since the year 2000, the official inflation rate, as reported by the government, is somewhere along the lines of 2.5 to 2.6% per year. Now, you and I have our own ideas on whether that's a reasonable and accurate portrayal of what our inflation rate's been doing, but that's the reported inflation rate. During that same time, the national debt has increased by 8% per year. And when you think about 8% per year, that means the national debt doubles every 9 years, or a little bit more than that. And sure enough, if you just start taking our national debt in the year 2000 at $5.7 trillion and you double that every 9 years, well, you're going to get to where we're at today, and you will see that we have some pretty significant problems on the horizon. If you think a nearly $40 trillion debt is bad today, what will an $80 trillion debt look like 10 years from now? And a lot of people will say that's impossible. It won't get to that point. But when our national debt was at $5 trillion, people said it would be impossible to double in 10 years, and they were wrong. When it was at $10 trillion, they thought it would be impossible to double in 9 or 10 years, and they were wrong. When it was at $20 trillion, and they were told that it might double in 9 to 10 years, they thought that was impossible, and they were wrong. So just keep in mind, our history has shown during this century that the national debt's been doubling at a rate of about 8%, doubling at a rate of about every 9 or 10 years, which is 8% a year. Now, silver has been going up during that same time, from the year 2000, when it was at $5 an ounce, until last year, when it was around $54 an ounce. Silver was going up at the rate of 10% per year, which was 4 times the stated rate of our inflation, and it was 2% over what we know our national debt has been increasing by each year. And so it did very well. This year, of course, or in the last 12 months, we have certainly more than gone up by 10%, especially when you look at it from that $54 level. But it gives you an idea of what silver, and gold, by the way, is very commensurate on that. It's very comparable to what silver's done. But it will tell you what precious metals and other commodities can do during times of inflation. And so, if you're wondering, why would I want to begin stacking silver or gold, this will give you an idea. Just to keep up with the rate of inflation, or to do a little bit better than that, sometimes it's good to take some of your paper currency, if you can afford to do so, and put it into something that you know will hold its value or has a history of holding its value. You don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 months or 2 years, but you can follow the chart of these commodities and see that they go up and to the right over the years. And so that means they're steadily going up. And we know, we've just talked about the fact that silver has gone up at a rate of about 10% a year since the year 2000. A quarter of a century is a pretty good track record. And so that will give you some idea. It's not going to tell you what's going to happen in the short term, but it does give you an idea of what it can do in the long term. So, if you are indeed of a mind that says, I don't like what's going on in this world right now, I'm a little bit concerned about the state of our currency, I'm concerned about the state of our government, I'm concerned about the stability of the world, well, in that case, it makes sense to begin to start looking at some things that could insulate you a little bit from the things that could occur. It's not going to isolate you from these things. If the world economy does turn down, well, everybody's going to suffer. But if you're prepared for that, you can suffer a little bit less perhaps than you would have otherwise. And more importantly, you'll be in a position to help your family and others that you might want to help if there is a significant downturn or a very difficult time. It's been about 100 years since, or 90 years anyway, since the world has experienced a Great Depression, and those things tend to come in cycles, and we may be due for another one, not because of some kind of a prophetic forecast, but just because of typical cycles. It's not unreasonable to think that the world could experience some trouble in upcoming years, and I believe we're starting to see a fairly shaky foundation for the world's economy right now. So, if I was to advise my children, this is what I would encourage them. Get you a long-term strategic pantry. Start with some very basic food items that will last you for a month or two. You can start with beans and rice at a very low cost, and then you can get more strategic with it as you have the funds to do that. You can stock up on things you know you will need, like paper towels and foil and plastic baggies and toilet paper and razors and oil filters, just different things that you know that you will use in the next year. It's like I'm always telling my wife, whatever you buy today is on sale as compared to tomorrow, because the inflation rate is seeming to advance at a pretty good rate right now. So doing things like that, I believe, are prudent. I'm not talking about tearing down your barns and building bigger ones and thinking that you can just take it easy for the rest of your life. In the long run, we're all dead, and in the short term, we are servants of God, so just be as good of a steward as you can with your possessions in His service. But part of that, I believe, is to make sure that we're not part of the problem when times get difficult, and even better than that, that we're part of the solution to where we can oftentimes help people who are really going to need the help. But again, I believe this is the long-term lens we need to be looking at these different things. Silver has been an excellent long-term hedge against inflation. It's certainly outpaced inflation for the last quarter century. Will it continue to do that? Who knows? But as long as we have irresponsible people in charge of our currency, as long as there are central banks in the world, I think you're going to do pretty good with silver and gold over the long term. So it wouldn't hurt to put a little bit of that aside along with a strategic pantry to try and help prepare you as prudently as possible for anything that might come up in the future. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we replace our trust in God with our trust in things, but I do believe He expects us to use our common sense on these things, and that would be my encouragement to you as well. Well, that's the video for today. I'm about to go and coach about 40 little kids. They're going to perform at halftime for our high school basketball team for the last time this year, so I won't be around to answer comments, at least for a while this evening. But I did want to get a video up, and I hopefully gave you some information that will at least give you something to think about to where you can make your own plans, not just for the short term, things coming up, but for the long term, and maybe a little bit more of an eternal perspective than many of us often have in mind. That's the video. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I really appreciate your watching, and for those of you who have subscribed, I'm in your debt for doing so. Thank you so much. But hopefully we will see you again next time. God bless.